From the window of my high-rise apartment, I could never have predicted how my life would turn out. I could see the morning mist sweeping across the well-kept lawns below in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was the type of neighborhood where each home had the same peaceful cobblestone roads and meticulously trimmed hedges, perfectly manicured for curb appeal. But I had discovered that behind those immaculate white picket fences, things were not as ideal as they appeared. 3 years had passed since the death of my father-in-law, Henry Whitmore. He was a respected accountant who had done well for his family before suffering a heart attack in his sleep at the age of 62, leaving behind my mother-in-law, Margaret, and her 2 children, my wife, Lena, and her little sister, Sophie. But they didn't find comfort in the security he had left behind. I married Lena 5 years ago, and my appetite for luxury was far greater than what Henry had provided. I thought I had found my ideal partner. She was intelligent, attractive, and came from a close-knit, friendly family. I liked their camaraderie, the Sunday brunches, the Christmas traditions. Being married into a family that took pride in staying together felt special to me because I had lost my own parents when I was young. It felt like a gift, a second chance, to belong. But I eventually came to the realization that what I had mistaken for loyalty and love was actually manipulation and entitlement. I was the ideal target. I worked as a senior financial analyst at Whitman & Carter, one of the most prominent investment firms in New York. My pay was significant but limited. I oversaw portfolios worth millions, making deliberate choices that affected the wealth of influential clients. But somehow, marrying into this family was the biggest financial risk I had ever taken. And at first, I didn't even realize it. It started small. Little ways I was drawn into their financial network. Margaret maintained a modest public persona, always emphasizing the importance of being humble, of living within one's means. But behind closed doors, she had a kitchen stocked with exotic wines and a wardrobe filled with high-end accessories. She made generous donations to the church, not out of charity but for prestige. She needed to be seen as the loyal widow, carrying on her late husband's legacy. And then, there was Sophie. At 26, she had lofty aspirations. She had talent, I'll give her that, but she lacked financial discipline. She had a job at an upscale boutique in Manhattan, more than enough to support her lifestyle. But focusing solely on luxury only fed her appetite. Every paycheck disappeared. Shoes, handbags, expensive dinners, and when the credit card bills arrived, she came to me. "I'll pay you back, Mark," she would say. But next month never came, and Lena, she saw nothing wrong with it. "She's young, she's still learning," she would say dismissively. Then came the guilt trip. Family helps family. I never signed up for this contract. What was I supposed to do? Let her ruin her credit? Let Margaret fall behind on her mortgage? Every time I gave in, it felt less like kindness and more like a silent tax for being their son-in-law. And I paid it. Discreetly. I covered Sophie's overdue bills. I helped Margaret maintain her appearances. I wanted to believe that if the roles were reversed, they would do the same for me. But it was never enough. The more I gave, the more they took. I kept telling myself, just one more time. Then, Sophie got engaged. I should have seen it coming. Margaret and Lena treated it like a royal declaration. Sophie's fiancé, Ryan Carter, was a young, ambitious chef opening his own restaurant. As Sophie gushed about her fairy tale wedding, I could already feel the noose tightening. And then, as if on cue, they turned to me. Lena's voice was gentle. "Mark, your father-in-law would have done this for her." Margaret played the guilt card effortlessly. "I know it's a lot, but I just want everything to be perfect." Instead of saying no, I stayed silent. I always took out my wallet and kept my mouth shut. $50,000. That was the price of keeping the peace, of preventing Margaret from treating me like an outsider, of stopping Lena from looking at me like I had failed her. I wired the money without a second thought, and that was my biggest mistake. I should have seen it in Margaret's eyes. That glimmer, the one that always came before she asked for something. She sighed, folding her perfectly manicured hands in front of her. You've always been so good to this family. Mark! Sophie sat on the couch, grinning, twisting the 2-carat engagement ring on her finger, a diamond that Ryan, a struggling chef, couldn't possibly afford. Sophie admires you, Mark, Margaret said, slipping into that well-practiced tone of motherly persuasion. Then came the guilt trip. Lena reached for my hand. She's been dreaming about this since she was a little girl. It would mean so much. The key word, perfect. This wasn't about Sophie getting married. It was about putting on a show, a performance to impress their social circle. I tried to push back. Ryan's family must be thrilled. I'm sure they'll contribute, Sophie scoffed. They're not exactly wealthy, Mark, she laughed, as if the idea was absurd. As if a simple wedding was beneath her, Margaret pulled out a folder. Color-coded, vendor contacts, cost breakdowns, venue estimates. They had planned it all before even asking me. I flipped through the pages, my stomach twisting. The most expensive hotel in town, a custom-fitted designer gown, a renowned chef, not Ryan. I closed the folder. This is insane, Sophie pouted. But it's my wedding. I turned to Lena. Do you think this is reasonable? What about Ryan? Margaret sighed, exasperated. Mark, you know how hard it is to start a restaurant. He's investing in their future. Oh, so now I was investing in their future too. I glanced at Margaret. And you? I assume you're contributing? Her response was as fake as her smile. You know I would if I could, Mark. But things have been tough since Henry passed. Tough? This, from the woman with a walk-in closet of designer shoes and thousands in church donations just to maintain her social status? I put the folder down. I can't cover all of this. For the first time, Sophie looked genuinely upset. But you make 6 figures, and that was when it hit me. They didn't see my sacrifices as kindness. They saw them as obligations, as if my success meant they owned. My money, Margaret leaned forward. Henry always put family first. Another dagger. Another reminder that I was supposed to fill his shoes. Lena stroked my arm. You should do whatever you can. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But I hesitated, and that was all Margaret needed. She reached over, squeezed my hand. You'll come through, Mark. And just like that, the conversation shifted. The decision had already been made, and I was just the one paying for it. Through the screen, serious eyes gazed at me. If this sale went through, it might result in millions of dollars in earnings. I checked the firm's clock. 11 a.m. If I finished, I still had 2 hours. I could still make it there in time. But then the market crashed. Chinese tech stocks fell. Red arrows flashed across the screen. My chest constricted. This wasn't your average drop. This was mayhem. If I left now, I'd be abandoning my duty to the company. If I stayed, I'd be late to the wedding, damaging my reputation and my team's trust. I stayed in the conference until noon. My father had already given me the answer. Then, after 1 p.m., when the market had calmed and the company's investments were secured, I looked at the clock. p.m., my hands shook. I had missed the entire ceremony. I picked up my phone. 26 missed calls. Most from Lena, a few from Margaret, and a couple from unknown numbers. I threw on my suit, ran out of my office, and called Sophie, not even bothering to check the voicemails. I hailed a cab and pleaded with the driver to hurry. But it was Friday afternoon. Traffic in Greenwich had other plans. By the time I arrived at the High Regency, the wedding reception was ending. The venue was stunning. Gold lights flickered. Over tables draped in white linen, the scent of expensive floral arrangements and exquisite wine hanging in the air. Guests chatted quietly, sipping their drinks. Lena and Margaret stood in the middle, holding wine glasses. As I approached, Margaret turned her back before I could say a word. She took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes gleaming with amusement. Lena grinned. "Your seat has already been cleared." My stomach dropped. The guests chuckled. Not with me, but at me. Lena clinked her glass against her mother's. I glanced at the tables. The one I had paid for was gone. Only a crumpled place card with my name lay on the floor, already stepped on and forgotten. This was intentional. Margaret knew I would arrive. Lena knew I had done everything to be here. Yet, they treated me as an afterthought. I could have argued, demanded an apology, reminded everyone that I had funded this entire event. Instead, I stood there, silent, unattached. Then I turned and walked away. That night, my phone kept ringing. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the screen, waiting for an apology that never came. Missed calls, texts. Lena, how could you humiliate Sophie on her special day? Margaret, you made us look terrible at church. Sophie, after everything we did, for you couldn't even show up properly? You embarrassed me. Not one of them apologized. Not one acknowledged their actions. By midnight, I had over 50